In a world of ordinary fantasy football podcasts, ordinary guys rise up to bring you extraordinary analysis and entertainment. This is the FLAFFL House Fantasy Football Podcast with your hosts Kevin Cotillo, Sal Lito, and Stephen Marcus.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today is Thursday, January 5th, and this is the FLAFFL House Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Cotillo, and I have with me just one man. Just Steve
only
Marcus.
One man.
I have only
That's
one
right.
man with me tonight.
And let's be honest, man is a generous term.
It's very true. You are being factually correct there. I use the term loosely. In fact, if both of you were here, if we had our friend Sal with us, I'd still use the term loosely.
Yeah, that's
for
true.
very different reasons, by the way. You know what else I realized as I was doing the intro today, is that I say it's the fantasy or FLAFFL House Fantasy Football Podcast immediately after we play the intro that says it's the FLAFFL House Fantasy Football Podcast.
That's true. You just really like to drive the point home?
Yeah, just like to make sure everyone knows that it is the FLAFFL House Fantasy Football Podcast.
That's right.
I wonder
Absolutely.
if we started to say it even more often, if we could get some like college kids to make a drinking game. Because there's a lot of college kids on the app, on the Fantasy Life app.
That's true.
So maybe they could start a drinking game where they listen to the podcast, and every time we say FLAFFL House Fantasy Football Podcast, they take a drink.
That's not a bad idea, because not only are there a lot of college kids, there's just a lot of alcoholics in general on there.
Yeah, so. It's a very alcohol-friendly app. that's for sure.
Visit the beer chat. Go and visit the beer chat, and you guys say more.
That's right. You can check out the beer chat. Before you head out for the night, you can check out the pizza chat. I think there's a pizza chat. So, anyway, sorry, I digress. We are here to talk about football. We are here to talk about fantasy football in general, but for the most part, since it's week 18, if you will, it's the playoffs. We're going to talk about the games more than the fantasy, because while a lot of people are doing fantasy, playoff challenges such as the FLAFFL Fantasy Playoff Challenge or Playoff Fantasy Challenge, and other such things, most people are just doing the random stuff, right? It's not leagues are not still going. Hopefully. If they are, Sal, I believe, has some bone to pick with you.
Yes, ask Sal what you should do with your lineup this week. He enjoys those types of questions,
he does
especially
like
now.
That. Yeah. By the way, make sure you ask Sal, like on Mondays during the regular season, make sure you ask Sal whether or not you're going to win based on the players you have going left. He loves that.
And not only does he love it, he's great at picking who's actually going to win.
Yes.
So you're going to get great advice from him.
Yes.
And you don't understand the joy that it brings him to see those questions.
It really does. He talks about it constantly. So I would definitely urge you next season when we start off the year, week 1, definitely when you get to Monday, if you have a question about whether or not you will win, go to Sal, at Sal33 on the Fantasy Life app, at LitoSal on Twitter. He will appreciate it. And you can find Steve and I on the app. I'm at Wally Central. He's at Sid Skeet. You can find us on Twitter under those names. You can also search for the show on Twitter. It's at FLAFFL House. And you can find the FLAFFL House chat by searching for that in the Fantasy Life app if you so choose. If you want to just go to beer or pizza, that's fine. But you should probably check out our chat too.
Yes, it would be a good idea. And since you're mentioning all of those Twitter handles, at the top is pinned to each of our profiles the sign-up link for the FLAFFL Playoff Fantasy Challenge. So if you have not yet done that, you are running out of time. You are going to be hearing this on Friday, so lineups are going to lock Saturday, and that's going to be it. So time is running out. Make sure you get in there. Of course, the prize for winning this is a spot in the Scott Fish Bowl 2017. You're going to want to be a part of that. So be sure to get signed up.
I really want to win because I feel like after my showing this year, Scott might kick me out. So
yeah, absolutely. I need this.
Yeah, I feel like if I at least pull out the victory here, he has no chance of kicking me out.
That's right. It's gonna, becomes out of his hands.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and thank you to Scott for constantly supporting this show and helping us out and giving us prizes and all of that stuff. He does more for this show than anyone probably will ever know, and we appreciate it. That's enough for that, I guess. All right, so let's get into the football games. We're going to talk. What we're going to do for tonight's show or today's show, if you're listening during the daytime, we are going to talk about the 4 games. Actually, forget it. We're going to talk about the whole playoffs. Steve and I are going to go through our brackets. We're going to let you know what we think will happen in these playoffs. I suggest, based on Steve's accuracy rating this year, that you don't really bet on it.
Hey, I went positive, all right? Went positive for all my picks this year, which means you would have won some money, not a ton, but that's all really depending on how much you're betting. If you're betting $100,000 hands, then you would have won a considerable amount of money. So I went positive. You don't knock me like that, Kev.
So your articles, which you can find on flafflehouse.com, went positive for the whole season?
Correct. Positive for the whole season. Dead Duck, Sean, he did better than me. I will not be afraid to admit that or ashamed. And but yes, combined we were positive, but separately we were each both positive as well. So yes, it was a successful season. Could have been a little better, but we'll save that for next year.
That is definitely interesting. I would not have thought that. I would have thought that about Sean, but not you. But
yeah, that's fair.
Again, falafelhouse.com. You can check that out. You guys will be back again next year with more suggestions for those of you who like to throw a few shekels down on the game. We also do have stuff going on off season with falafelhouse.com. Not a lot, but there will be some. So definitely check it out. It's a good place to find everything, like the link to the FLAFFL Playoff Challenge. All right. So Steve, speaking of betting, while we go through this first round of games, since the lines are already set on them, will probably change over the next couple of days. But since the lines are set, why don't you give me the lines so that we can kind of talk about that as well? Because obviously, for fantasy implications, that you can usually use the lines to sort of figure out whether or not it's going to be a high-scoring game. So.
Yes, and we're planning on talking about a few different fantasy games towards the back end of this podcast, so you might want to keep this kind of stuff in mind. Do you want me to go through all of them, or do you want me to just give the one for the first game that we're going to talk about here?
We'll go one at a time. I'll lead you through them. You just follow my lead.
You got it.
All right, so we're going to start off talking about the Oakland Raiders at the Houston Texans. This game is at 4:35 on Saturday. Again, make sure you get all your lineups set before then. So... what's the line there, Steve?
Line in this game is Houston -3.5. So, if you're a regular bettor or you pay attention to the lines, you know that the home team automatically is worth 3 points if both teams are considered equal. So the Vegas is really only giving Houston a half-point edge in this game, which is kind of odd considering the quarterback that is going to be starting for the Oakland Raiders. Everyone knows it's his first game starting as quarterback, and it's a playoff game on the road. So -3.5. But what's really astounding here is the over/under for this game is 36.5.
Wow, 36.5.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So I'll give you my pick for this game while we're talking about it, and I went through these as obviously with some scores in mind. I have Houston beating Oakland by 20-17. So 37 for me.
That is crazy, and that's also, that's half point on the total and also a half point on the spread.
Yeah, so I would take the Raiders and the over if you're betting. I would not bet this game because I do not feel comfortable about the 20-17 or the winner. So personally, for me, I'm staying away from it. But what about you? What do you have in this one?
This is the hardest game of the weekend for me to pick personally. The other ones I can, talk myself into one side either way, but this game I can really talk myself into and out of either team. But right now I've got it as Oakland winning on the road, the rookie, first-time starter, getting the win. But I can't say that that's going to stick before. But for these purposes on the podcast, I'm going to go with Oakland. I'm going to represent for Sal, and I'm going to say that they get this playoff win.
Yeah, I would have said that if it was... Actually, I don't even know if I would have said that with McLaurin. I don't think that the defense has played well enough, even though they're going up against Asswasher and the terrible Houston offense, For some reason, I think at home in the playoffs, Houston's actually going to put up a little bit more points. The defense in Oakland has been terrible, and on top of that, they have a third-string quarterback playing. I don't see it happening. I don't know. Even though, like I said, it's a pick 'em for me as well. I think Houston will edge them out.
I'm already starting to lean back over towards Houston. You mentioned those things one time, and it's like, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But then you got all 4 home teams. Well, I guess I just gave away a bunch of stuff, but
wow.
never mind.
Nice job.
So let's move on.
Suspense. All right, so the next game we're going to Saturday night at 8:15, the Detroit Lions travel to Seattle. Obviously, Seattle. We talked about it earlier this week, right? Detroit just did not do themselves any favors by losing to Green Bay in the last week of the season because now they have to travel to one of the hardest places to play. It's practically the other edge of the country for them, and it's a long drive or a long flight, and it's the hardest place to play. So I have Seattle pulling this victory out. I do only have the score at 24-20, so I think it'll be closer than. I do think it'll be closer, but. What's the line on this one, and what's the over/under?
I got to say, twice is borderline starting to get impressive, Kev. We got the total for this game is 43.5.
Okay.
So, you've got it at 44. The spread, although, is Seattle minus 7.5, giving up more than a touchdown, which is seems crazy. Like a lot in a playoff game. Detroit losing 3 straight heading into the playoffs. They're reeling all the talk about Matthew Stafford and his finger and that, but I think you nailed it. They're going to the hardest place to play. Playoff game, that place is going to be noisy. With the way that Detroit's offense has been playing, I would be kind of hard-pressed to take the points, and I've bet on Detroit all year long. I've picked them so many times in the FLAFFL House article, but I'm kind of off the wagon there, and I think that they might actually get the score run up on them.
Yeah, it's possible. I could see this game being a 24-3 too. I have it at 24-20, but I honestly I could see Detroit scoring like 3 points and that's it. Seattle's defense is going to come to play, and like you said, the offense for Detroit has been struggling, so I could certainly see that happening. All right, let's move along. And get to the Sunday games, which we will start with a 1:00 game, which will be Miami Dolphins traveling to the Pittsburgh Steelers. In this game, again, the home team. I don't think Miami has a shot. I know they had a nice run going up into towards the end of the season. I think New England kind of showed the rest of the league what kind of team in the world really, what Miami really is for a team. They're a good team. They're a team on the rise. I think they have a decent defense with an okay offense, but they're just not an elite team. And I think they should be happy they made it into the dance. But I have Pittsburgh winning this game, and I have the score at 27-20.
27-20. Well, you've seemingly done it again. The total for this game is 46. So you're only off by 1 on that one. Yeah. And the spread is Steelers minus 10.
Wow, 10.
Double digits against 2 playoff teams, and you're getting a double-digit spread here. I think you nailed it when you said New England last week kind of exposed them when they went into Miami. That game last week was a Miami home dog of 9.5 points, and that is Sharp in Vegas sees that line, and you almost take it no matter what. You don't even look at the teams. You're getting 9.5 points at home. And they just absolutely obliterated them. Mm-hmm. And so, if that kind of thing happens on Sunday, it almost won't be surprising at this point.
No.
Unfortunately, we've got a lot of Dolphins fans in the FLAFFL chat. They're excited, and you hope for the best for them, but it doesn't look like it's going to last much more than a week. I know they'll make fun of me because the Broncos didn't even make the playoffs and all that stupid crap, but whatever.
It's all right. Just wait till you have Tony Romo next year. It'll all be different. It'll all be different.
That's right.
So who do you? I assume you have Pittsburgh in this as well.
Yes, I do.
All right,
I've got Pittsburgh.
So let's move along then. The final game of the weekend, 4:00 on Sunday, 4:40, I should say, for those of you who listen to this to get your times for some odd reason. The New York Giants will travel to Green Bay to play the Packers. Look, we all know what happens at Lambeau Field. It's tough to almost as tough to play at Lambeau Field as in CenturyLink, but some people would say harder. I don't know that it's as bad as it used to be. I think some of the mystique has worn off in Green Bay because people have gone in there and won. But you certainly can't argue with the success that the Packers have had lately. Offensively, they have turned things around completely since Aaron Rodgers basically said they would and said they would run the table. They've basically dominated everyone. The offense is ridiculous. The Giants, while they have played great defense, I just don't see them being able to fully contain the offense there. I see the Packers winning this game by a score of 30-27.
30-27. Well, the over-under for this game, this one has been your worst call so far. It's only 44.5.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they're expecting two teams to step up defensively here that I don't know that have, obviously I just said the Giants have been better defensively this year, but with how good the Packers have been playing, I don't know how you stop them.
Yep. I mean, then they got the Packers are favorite 4.5 points. So, I just mentioned the 3 points you automatically get. And so they're taking the Packers and they're putting the value on them. They're saying that they're the better team. They're the hotter team. They are the team that is, garnering the most attention, definitely from the public's eye with what they've done recently. So I am leaning your way. I think the Packers are going to dispose of the Giants. Everyone says, oh, Eli Manning, both times he's been in the playoffs, he's had to go into Green Bay and he's won both times. It's like, all right, well, I think that twice is good, but 3 times, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to get the best of him this time.
Completely agree there. All right, so that's it for the first round. Obviously, those are the games this weekend. We'll get into more detail in them as we move along the podcast. We're going to talk about my lineup for the FLAFFL Playoff Challenge, and we're also going to talk about a DraftKings bet that Steve and I have against each other. So we'll go through some lineups there. But let's continue on, Steve. Obviously, the first game we had a difference on was the Houston and Oakland game. You think Oakland's going to move on to play against New England, whereas I think that Houston will move on. I think we both think that it really doesn't matter because neither of them are beating New England.
That's right. I'm pretty sure that Oakland and Houston have already worked out an agreement to forfeit the following week
right.
because they're just going to take their win and be happy with that. So they don't want to risk any injury. It's unnecessary. Yes, New England is going to beat whoever comes into town in the divisional round.
Right. So, look, I have that score at 31-17, New England over Houston. For me, I think you could put the same score for New England over Oakland. And I'm not even sure 17 is actually going to happen. So we'll see. In the other AFC matchup, obviously we both have Pittsburgh going to Kansas City to play the number 2 seed. I think Pittsburgh actually pulls this game out. I have Pittsburgh narrowly beating Kansas City by 3 points in my predictions.
Yes, I also have Pittsburgh winning. I didn't get as far as making a score prediction, but I think Pittsburgh goes into Arrowhead and they get that win. I think having all of their star players healthy and as long as they stay healthy throughout this run is going to be huge for them. They're hot, just like Green Bay is, and so I think they ride that for a few games into the playoffs. I think they beat Kansas City.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about how good Kansas City has played offensively over the past few weeks and how hot they are coming in. I think the bye week actually kind of works against them because of that fact. And I don't know. I don't think Andy Reid's. I think he will screw something up. So
isn't Andy Reid like 14-1 or something coming out of a bye though?
Yeah,
during the regular
probably.
Season.
But that's regular season, and you see him during the playoffs. You've seen him. I mean, look, I remember very clearly the Super Bowl, the Eagles against the Patriots, where he screwed up the clock management at the end of that. Now I know a lot of that was Donovan McNabb. I don't know if you remember that, but.
I remember all the NFC Championship games they came up short in.
Yeah, I
remember all those.
Seems to me that he always finds a way to mismanage the clock at the end of the game or call a timeout wrong or whatever. So I don't know. I think Pittsburgh, I think you're right. I think Pittsburgh's playing really well, and I just think they get the better of them. On the other side of the ball, other side of the league, in the NFC conference, what the hell am I doing tonight? Jeez.
I don't know.
I can't speak.
I don't know. Talking about some football.
Yeah, it must be Sal's not here. I'm a little flustered.
Yeah, I agree. His lack of presence is very it hurts.
It's disturbing.
Almost.
Well, it's disturbing. And he left me with you, which
That's not nice.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No, it's not nice of him to do that.
Oh, yeah, yes. That was what I was going for. I'm glad you weren't offended by that.
No, not at all.
No, okay. So Dallas, the number 1 seed, will obviously then move on to play Green Bay. We both have Green Bay beating New York. So in this game, I think it's a shootout, 30-27. I have the score, and I actually think Green Bay goes into Dallas to get the win. And Aaron Rodgers makes it what? How many games would that be? That would be 8 straight games.
That would be 8 in a row, yes. And this is where all of the Cowboys fans instantly open the Falafel chat to tell us how wrong we are.
Yeah.
Because, we are on the one-and-done wagon for the Dallas Cowboys. I agree. I think Green Bay goes in and handles Dallas. Much like you said about Kansas City, I think this bye week kind of hurts Dallas, and I just think the inexperience catches up with them at some point. I think Green Bay takes care of them.
Yeah, I mean, a talented team like Green Bay going up against, your 2 most important players being rookies in Dallas for Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott. It's a tough matchup. I think the Packers have the ability to stop the run. Obviously, they did it very, very well in the beginning of the season. They kind of faltered a little bit, and they were starting to get back to it. But so they have the ability to stop the run. And hopefully, they can turn that around and limit Elliott. And I think if you can limit Elliott, then you're gonna make Dak struggle because of the pressure of a playoff game. All right, Atlanta, number 2 seed, taking on Seattle, who we both believe is gonna dispose of Detroit, and I have Atlanta in this one, 34-27. I think that it was probably a high score for this game. I really, they may not score this many points because actually Atlanta's defense has been playing very well, and we all know about Seattle's defense, but we also know about Atlanta's offense. They've been phenomenal throughout the season. What did they tie the highest scoring team, which I believe was the greatest show on turf, Kurt Warner's Rams from back in the day. So overall, great season for them offensively, and I think they keep it rolling here.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I think Atlanta wins this game against Seattle. Being in Atlanta is going to be huge for them. If it were in Seattle, you might think a little bit differently about that. But we saw that game earlier this year, Atlanta in Seattle, and we saw Richard Sherman pass interference against Julio Jones at the very end of that game that, who knows what happens if they're given an extra play to run. Mm-hmm. So you already know that Atlanta can keep up with Seattle. And it's you've seen Seattle's offense the last few weeks as well. So you know that they've been able to score some points, but you've also seen the dark side of their offense, where Atlanta's offense hasn't really had that game where you're just like, or things really falling off, and Seattle's had quite a few of them. So
wait, there were times where Russell Wilson wasn't good?
There were just a few of them. If you go back and listen to this podcast, you can probably pick out which weeks he did worse just based on the volume of my voice.
Right.
So, yeah. So I've got Atlanta winning this game as well.
All right. So that takes us to the conference championships, and we have the same 4 teams: New England against Pittsburgh and Green Bay against Atlanta. I have New England beating Pittsburgh 34-30. I think it's a shootout in Foxborough, but I think New England gets the better of them. I just think overall they're more complete team as far as offensively and defensively. I think they can keep up with Pittsburgh in a shootout type and limit them just enough to get the win. I also think on the NFC, Atlanta has too much firepower for Green Bay, and their win streak will stop at that 8 games. They will be out of it after playing Atlanta, and Atlanta will face New England in the Super Bowl.
Yes, I also have New England winning against Pittsburgh, but if I were picking with my heart, I will be rooting for Pittsburgh in that game. I've got a good buddy that's he's a huge Pittsburgh fan, and so when Denver's out of it and
you have a good buddy that's a New England fan, right?
Yeah, I do. That's also true. But
I'm right here.
Listen, you just won like 2 years ago, okay? You don't get greedy.
All right.
And so, I picked New England. But, I don't care who wins this game. I'm just looking forward to watching it because I think it's going to be a really good one. But I agree. I think New England's too good right now to really be able to pick against them. And so, like I said, I hope Pittsburgh would win that game. But I think that New England's just too well-rounded for them to be overcome like that. And then in the other game, Green Bay at Atlanta, I'm actually opposite of you in this one. I think Green Bay keeps it going. I think Aaron Rodgers wins his 9th straight game in Atlanta and continues on to the Super Bowl against the Patriots. So I've got a Green Bay at New England Super Bowl.
All right, that would be a fun game too. New England and Green Bay, I think, would be a more fun game to watch, and plus all the build up to it than Atlanta and New England. What I have Atlanta and New England. I obviously have the Patriots. I think everyone was pretty clear that was who I was going to pick. So I have the Patriots winning this game. I actually didn't do a score for this one. I probably should. I think it's probably going to be somewhere in the high scoring ranges again. I think you see a 30-27 or a 34-31, something in that range, which I think would be fun from a fantasy perspective. Not that anyone's really playing fantasy there, but at the end of the day, I think that's what what you will see.
Yes, and as we have alienated one fan base with the Dallas Cowboys, I'm going to hopefully bring this back with a different fan base for our Green Bay Packers, as I am taking them to beat the New England Patriots and Aaron Rodgers go win his 10th straight game of the season and win the Super Bowl. So there you go, to Go Pack Go and Beat a Poo and Annie Packers, all our Packers fans out there. I'm taking Green Bay. I think that they actually ride this hot streak all the way through the playoffs and end up winning.
All right, so that's our predictions for the playoffs this year. I think if Sal were here, he would agree with me completely. So we'll just assume that he does. All right, so
I think he's picking Oakland to win out.
That's true. Yeah, I'm sure he's been quite clear that he thinks that they are not going to do that, but all right, so clearly you can see you can hear, I should say, based on my playoff predictions, who I think is going to play more games. And so we're going to talk a little bit about my fantasy, my FLAFFL Playoff Challenge fantasy team here that I've selected. I'm willing to go through the team, even though, people will be listening to this and could potentially steal my team.
Yep.
But that's fine. We would just share the title then, so that's okay.
That's right.
And anyway, so basically my thought process when I started to go through this, Steve, was to first off look at some fantasy points per game averages for the players that are involved, right? So I kind of went through and looked at all of the fantasy points per game that each player had. And then what I, also did was add in a little bit of a, almost like a multiplier, right? If I think Dallas is only playing one game, and Ezekiel Elliott's averaging 22 points per game for fantasy, so I list him at 22 points. Because you can only pick one player from each team, the number of games is obviously a huge factor in this.
Yes, absolutely, and that's a great way of doing it. Very methodical, and is it's like someone who uses Excel all the time would have thought of that. And it's just like, hey, I'm gonna put this out on the. I bet you have an Excel spreadsheet. This is all set up on.
I absolutely do.
That's right.
Yes.
So
for those of you who don't know, when we do our rankings for the season, I think of the three of us, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, I'm the only one that uses actual math to do it.
I do believe that's correct.
Yeah.
I can't speak for Sal because he's never here.
Right.
And but yeah, I think that is correct. You use a computer program for math.
Yes, I use formulas. Yes, I don't do the math with the abacus or in my head or on paper. I do use Excel quite extensively, but I use a lot of formulas and numbers to make my predictions, and it includes a number of factors. There's an overall projection, and there's a per game projection, and then I do some defensive weighting adjustments and things. I know we won't get into it, but anyway, I use math. That's what it boils down to. So yes, I did use some math to create my lineup for the playoff challenge.
But yeah, it absolutely makes sense. Like you said, if you think this person, or you have a feeling that this team's only going to play one game or two games, it makes sense to do that, to multiply what those potential points would be if they played all three of those games, because you might find that you have a different player that's also might play three games that would end up potentially scoring 10 points more based on their average. So I think that's a pretty smart way of doing that, at least getting a good basis for who you might want and who might be the most valuable for your team.
Right. So in this particular format, obviously I have Houston. I mean, I have New England, I have Atlanta, and I have Green Bay and Pittsburgh, I think, all playing 3 games, right? So those are the teams that play 3 games. So for me, I want players from those teams that are heavy point projections, right? Which in this type of format, you're talking quarterbacks and usually running backs, or I'm sorry, wide receivers. But as you will see, so I have Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers as my two quarterbacks.
I like it.
Originally, I was thinking Matt Ryan. I think when we talked about this earlier this week, I was planning on using Matt Ryan. But when I statted it out and kind of projected it, both of them playing only 3 games, Aaron Rodgers he seems like he's on fire too much for me to ignore. So I had to put him in there as the quarterback. So even though I won't have a quarterback in the final round, which would be the Super Bowl, I think I'm okay. I'm okay with it right now. So, and that's tough, right? Because you don't want to go that far. But as this is a cumulative game, you really just want to maximize the number of points, right?
Yeah, you're trying to get the most throughout the entire, it's cumulative, like you said. So, I mean, you can't just look at 1 week. You can't just look at this week. You can't just look at the last week. You have to look for what combination is going to give you the highest opportunity to score those points every single week. I can't argue with your choices too much. As we talked about on Monday, I have Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers as my two quarterbacks as well, and you're just hoping you get at least one of them into that title game.
Yep. So since you can't pick more than two quarterbacks for the other teams that play 3 games, I went Julio Jones with the chalk play for Atlanta. I think with a full point PPR, obviously Julio Jones has had a rough later part of the season given his injuries and things like that, but the rest should help him. I think they're going to come out firing, and I think that it should be a pretty good overall matchup for them to play Seattle. Like I said, I know Seattle's a good defense, but I think at home they're going to come out firing. So I went with Julio Jones. And then if the other thing for me, when you look at it, it's obviously not just Seattle. Seattle's not the best matchup when you're talking about wide receivers, although they aren't as bad as you might think. Seattle was very good against quarterbacks and tight ends, but not as great against wide receivers. So interestingly enough, when you start looking at that type of stuff, it's not as bad as you think for Julio Jones. But then you also have to look at going forward, right? And if I see Julio Jones playing playing Seattle, Green Bay, and New England, I think the Green Bay and New England games are solid matchups for Julio Jones. So 2 out of the 3 matchups I think that I expect him to face are quality plus matchups.
Yeah, and because of that, we were talking on Monday, and we've heard a lot of talk about it in the chat of people going contrarian, going full contrarian, or picking that guy. So for Atlanta, another guy that's been hot has been a Taylor Gabriel. And what I would warn against or caution against doing that is that because this isn't a weekly game where you're going to be able to pick and choose who you want every single week, going contrarian might pay off for you 1 week, but remember, you're trying to use these players for as many weeks as possible. So what are the odds that Taylor Gabriel is the wide receiver to own in Atlanta for this playoff run, however long it ends up being? The chances are that Taylor Gabriel will have a good game, and Julio Jones will probably have 4 pretty good games. So, when you're thinking about doing that, you might want to pick someone else because you don't want to be just like everybody else. You want to set yourself apart and be able to get yourself above somebody. But then you also got to think that all these guys are, Julio Jones is who he is because of how consistent he is. And so that's also something that you need to keep in mind when you're setting these guys out as well.
Yeah, great point there. And so working backwards here, you want to look then at who has 2 games. And for me, that ended up being Houston, and Seattle has 2 games, right? So when I'm looking at those, from here on out, positions I want to look at are most likely receivers, right? Because for players that are teams that are going to have 2 games, because it's more with the point per reception, you're going to expect more from them out of the 2 games. Oh, I'm sorry. I should back up though. Le'Veon Bell is my Pittsburgh choice.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask about that.
Sorry, I should back up. I mean, and look, I know he's not a wide receiver, but he's Le'Veon Bell.
He's basically a wide receiver.
He's basically a wide receiver, and that's the thing. He gets he's so active in the passing game, and with 3 games, I think he stats out better than Antonio Brown in my opinion. So particularly with the matchups that he will face. When you see him going against Miami, Kansas City, and then New England, I think that he'll be a solid play all across the board. Pretty much, I think you just have to get him in your lineup if you can. So then with the teams with 2 games, I kind of looked at receivers. So for me, I ended up with Odell Beckham from the Giants. Obviously, I'm sorry. That's a 1-game team.
He's a 1-gamer.
It's a 1-gamer. Yeah. So the 2 gamers. Who did I say were 2 gamers?
Seattle
and yes,
Houston.
Houston. So I went DeAndre Hopkins with Houston, which I know he's had a terrible year, but I don't love Lamar Miller in general. He's had a rough year as well. I think they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit, and because I think that's how you beat Oakland. I think Oakland's a little bit better against the run than they are against the pass. And, as bad as Osweiler's been, he does have something to prove in this, which is at least something. So he could force the ball to DeAndre Hopkins a little bit. Look, at some point in your lineup, you're going to have a guy that you're not comfortable with, right? Because you can only pick one from each team, and you only have a certain number of spots to fill. And as we go through this, I'll go through my other running backs, and you'll understand why I didn't go with Lamar Miller. I don't know that there's any other team that, any other selection here. Could have gone with the Houston defense, but particularly against a Raiders third-string quarterback, but I didn't love any of the Raiders receivers either. I mean, you got Amari Cooper and you got Crabtree there, but you're also talking about a third-string quarterback throwing them the ball. I think they're going to have trouble moving the ball through the air. I think they're going to have to run the ball a lot, so that made me nervous. So I went with DeAndre Hopkins as kind of a shot in the dark.
Yeah, I don't think there's really anything wrong with that because of his talent. And like you said, if you're getting 2 games from a guy, potentially 2 games from a guy, and he's getting the PPR, the full point PPR, he's going to get some work. And if he's playing in that game against New England, they're going to be behind. They're going to have to throw. And he's a guy that's had games with 17 targets in it. So he definitely commands the volume. I myself, like we talked about, I went with Houston's defense for this week, mostly because I didn't really trust anyone on their offense that I wanted even in there for a game. And I do think that Oakland, when I made my lineup, I was thinking heavily towards Oakland winning that game. So the defense, another reason why you might not have picked them is because you have Houston winning. And so you don't want to pick that defense knowing that, or thinking that Houston's going to win that game, knowing that you're going to have to use that position. Yep, and use that position next week and going up against New England in a terrible matchup. So makes sense for why you did not pick them as your defense. And DeAndre Hopkins, you could do a lot worse. Exactly.
And so, obviously I would have liked to have gotten, as I mentioned, with the 2 games, I would have liked to have gotten Doug Baldwin in there for Seattle. But as I alluded to, I went with Odell Beckham, even though he has 1 game because he's Odell Beckham. So Jimmy Graham was the Seattle player I picked at tight end. I think I think he's heavily involved in the passing game in most games this season. I think that the matchups for him in these 2 games, particularly going against Detroit and then going against Atlanta, I think he should be able to get a lot of work and might is a good red zone threat. So I think he could score. So for those 2 games, particularly with the point per reception, I think he's a good choice there.
Yep, I can't argue that. I think that, for the most part, your options with Seattle are kind of Doug Baldwin and Jimmy Graham, unless you want to roll the dice with Russell Wilson, which good luck on that. That's all I got to say about that. So in their running game, Thomas Rawls, you absolutely can't trust. I think you'd be kind of foolish to throw him in your lineup and expect weekly production. But, you can't knock Jimmy Graham. I think him and Doug Baldwin are kind of your only choices in my opinion.
Yeah, honestly, I did look to try to, when I was kind of mapping it out, I went with positions rather than the actual players as I was kind of thinking it through. And, Seattle and a running back seemed to fit, but like you said, I don't think you can trust Rawls. If Procise had been healthy for this one, I think I might have changed my mind a little bit and slotted him in there. But it didn't seem to work out that way. Obviously, he's still injured, but he's a guy I like a lot, particularly going into next season for those of you thinking about next season already. All right, so to finish out here, the teams with one game remaining obviously were the New York Giants, the Dallas Cowboys, the Miami Dolphins, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Detroit Lions and the Oakland Raiders. So how this shook out for me, I went with Jay Ajayi at running back. I think that he's been very solid. I think they're going to have to run a lot against Pittsburgh because I don't see them being able to throw very well with Matt Moore. And in general, Pittsburgh's been much better against the pass this year. I went with Ezekiel Elliott for Dallas, even though it's a one and done situation for me. I think he will be used a ton in that game. As we talked about, he could struggle, but I still think they're going to roll him out there and keep going. I think that's going to be the focus for the defense, but he's going to get a lot of work either way. I mentioned Odell Beckham's, in my receiver spot because he is Odell Beckham. Travis Kelce is the other tight end I went with. I just think he's on too much of a role to ignore. And it's because it's the tight end position with the one and done doesn't scare me as much. Matt Prater is my kicker because I didn't see anyone else on the Detroit offense that I could really trust. We talked about earlier, Seattle's a tough matchup, particularly in Seattle. So I don't know who else you're gonna throw in there. And then the Oakland Raiders defense rounds it out, like we said. That makes sense because you didn't have anyone else. I really wanted to get Latavius Murray in there, just didn't fit for me.
Yep, that's my where I have Houston and Oakland switched around, as I have Latavius Murray in for my Oakland player and Houston as my defense. But a few of those players that you listed in there, I've got in the same spot. I've got Travis Kelce, I've got Matt Prater, and like you said, these players with Detroit, you don't really know who you can rely on, and the same thing goes for Kansas City. You don't really know if Spencer Ware is going to be there. Sharkandrick West got a ton of the work on Sunday in Week 17. You got Tyreek Hill, who's been amazing, but with his limited amount of volume that he gets, he's just been making the most out of nothing. So you don't know if you want to trust that for for a couple weeks, however many weeks they're live. And so you pick the guys that I think you can rely on the most to get you a solid floor. And that's kind of what you're looking for in a game where you think they're only going to be around for 1 week.
Absolutely. All right, so that's my lineup for the playoff challenge. Copy it if you like. I suggest you don't. But, I did find it interesting that Sal said, I think last year we had not one single duplicated roster. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I think that's what he said. There weren't any, and if there were, it was like one or two.
One or two. And it's crazy.
There's so many different possibilities, and once you start getting into it, it's a lot of fun just selecting the lineup.
Oh yeah, I had a blast with it. I think my company probably would be upset as how much time I spent on it at work, but that's all right.
Yeah, they don't need to know about it.
They don't.
Your boss isn't listening, right?
Hey, I'll be at work early tomorrow. I promise. All right, so let's continue on. We did a DraftKings challenge, Steve. I challenged you to a duel.
You did, and let me tell you what, it's challenging.
It is challenging.
I'm not DraftKings everyone knows my woes in FLAFFL this year for fantasy, but DraftKings, this has been a couple years now where my DraftKings has been a little tough. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to set me straight where you think I might have gone off the old path here.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Obviously, we're agreeing to not change these lineups, I assume. Sure. We also invited Sal, but we can't see what lineup he picked, so it really doesn't matter. We'll let you know who wins. I, like Steve, have not had a very good year when it comes to DraftKings. Won a little bit here and there, kind of kept myself probably around a little less than even, which is good. Considering how badly I think I've done. So, but this week is particularly tough, Steven. We were talking about it off the air. Neither of us really loves our lineup very much.
Yeah, it's amazing because there's such a limited player field to pick from, and so you kind of are looking around and you want to pick the best of the best from each game, and it just is not possible. You really have to make a few sacrifices if you want to get some of those higher dollar guys in there, and my lineup definitely reflects that.
All right, so we're going to do this fairly quickly, but hopefully this will help some of you looking to set your lineups for the weekend. let's just do it position by position. We'll kind of go through our positions, and then we'll talk about any other thoughts you might have had as far as players you were considering. I'll start off with the quarterback. I started with Eli Manning, and the reason I did that is, like you said, obviously there's a limited number of players, right? What are we talking about? 8 quarterbacks overall. So is that right? Did I get that right? Yeah, 8 teams. Yeah. Four games, 8 quarterbacks. I think each team has a quarterback, right?
Yes, I believe. That's how the NFL works. I don't know. The first game that's on, you could argue that there are 0.
That is true. But so, all right. So there's your point, right? You're probably eliminating anyone from the Houston Oakland game right off the bat. I don't think you're going to spend the money on either of those, even though they are ridiculously cheap. So I think you have to eliminate them. So you're really picking from 6. And in my mind, I went with Manning because I wanted to save some money on quarterback because I knew I wanted to spend elsewhere, and he was on the cheaper end of quarterbacks when you're talking about guys like Aaron Rodgers at $7,900, Roethlisberger at $7,600, and Wilson at $7,000. I paid $6,100 for Eli Manning, which is sort of right in the middle of those three guys and the other guys at the bottom, because I wanted to save money or spend some money elsewhere.
Yeah, and I kind of went the same route there. I went a bit cheaper, and I went with good old Matt Moore from Miami, only $5,100. And my thought process behind that is that I wanted to pick a quarterback who I felt was probably going to have to throw the most. And I think that Miami is in danger of getting blown out in this game. So I think that there's going to be the most amount of opportunity for him to have to throw a lot in this game to catch up with Eli Manning. I know we both think that Green Bay is going to win, but there is a very real possibility that that the Giants could get up in this game and they don't have to throw as much. So that was the only thing that scared me away from those guys a little bit. And then other than that, it became more about the price. So. But looking at Brock Osweiler at $5,100 or Matt Moore, I've got much more faith in Matt Moore, so I went ahead and rolled him in.
Yeah, I can't argue with that, although I like the matchup better for Osweiler than I do for Matt Moore. So I that's the one thing that would throw me off. But yeah, I mean, Matt Moore, if you put Matt Moore on Houston, I would be all in. So,
which is amazing.
Yeah,
who'd have thought?
Right?
We're all talking up Matt Moore right now. I got him in my DraftKings lineup.
Yeah,
terrible.
That is
terrible year.
All right, let's move on then to running backs. I went super cheap. Actually, I think he's the cheapest guy I could possibly find for a running back here. I think he is actually the cheapest guy on here. He is one of the lowest salary players at $3,000. I went with Kenyon Drake. Obviously, I am saving money here for other players. Look, there were reports that came out recently that Miami wanted to get Kenyon Drake some more action. He obviously stole a touchdown because he had a great run up the sideline. Not the game against the Patriots, was the game that they played before. I can't remember, but had a nice run. They may try to get him involved, and I just think, if I'm going to go super cheap, you'll see why, with some of my later selections. So he was a guy that I think really fit in this because there's potential there, for $3,000. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, who was your other running? Who'd you pair him with?
So I paired him with Latavius Murray. I didn't go high end there. Murray obviously is at $5,000, which is half the price of a Le'Veon Bell at $10,300. Obviously, Bell is the guy to own. We talked about it already, but I do think Murray gets a lot of action, even though Houston's a tougher defense. So that's why I went with him, because I think you can't rely on Connor Cook, right? So they're going to have to run.
Yep, absolutely. My 2 running backs that I went with were Le'Veon Bell and Latavius Murray. I'm, biting the cheese, taking the huge chunk, the $10,300 that you said. I believe he's by far the most expensive player of the week. And I think, like I said, I think that Pittsburgh is going to get ahead in this one. And when they get ahead, if it's not from Le'Veon Bell, doing all the damage, he's going to have a lot of work to do once they get that lead, because they're going to rely on him to run the clock out, all that kind of stuff. So I was getting him in my lineup no matter what. And then I feel the same way about Latavius Murray. They are going to try and rely on him as much as possible as long as things don't get out of hand. I think he's going to get a very heavy workload. So at $5,000, I thought that he was a pretty good value there too.
Yeah, I can't see things getting out of hand when you're talking about Osweiler and Houston. So
Yes.
while I do think that's they're gonna win, I think there'll be plenty of ground game going on for the Raiders there. All right, so we'll move along here with wide receivers. Oh, any other? Actually, before we do, any other running backs that you thought we talked about a little bit? I think Ty Montgomery at 5,500 is a sucker's bet in my opinion. I just don't think you can predict exactly what he's going to do. The Giants have been better against running backs recently and wide receivers recently in general. Their overall defense has been playing better, and I think Green Bay probably might utilize their wide receivers, Jordy Nelson and Devontae Adams, in this one quite a bit. And I think Aaron Rodgers, being as hot as he is just going to throw the ball all over the field if he can. I don't think you can predict Ty Montgomery, so I think that's a bad play.
Yeah, I definitely do not disagree there. And then another one that I think would be a bad play is a Jay for $6,800, $1,800 more than Latavius Murray. And like I said earlier when talking about get Le'Veon Bell in there and Matt Moore having the opportunity to throw a lot. If things go south for Miami quickly, there is a chance that they have to ditch that run game rather quickly, even though, it's a good matchup. We all know what Jay did against Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago when he ran for 200 yards against them. I think Pittsburgh has heard about that all week too. They're going to be trying like hell to make sure that does not happen again. So I think that he's probably in for a little bit of a disappointment if you're rolling with Jay this week as well.
Yeah, that's a good point there, and I will say, I'm not as against Jay. I just think for 6,800 you might be overspending when you can get guys like Latavius Murray for 5,000. I think cheaper options if you want to load up on other positions too, like I did. Kenyon Drake. You think you played Aaron Ripkowski in another lineup, hoping for the touchdowns.
Booyah.
Yeah, so Jalen Richard's another guy at 3,400 you can take a chance on because like we said there, Oakland's going to run. Should be Latavius Murray, but Richard could get some work in there too. So those are guys that I would consider. All right, let's move along to the wide receivers. For my wide receivers, I tried to I went high end with Odell Beckham Jr. I went fairly high end with Doug Baldwin. I think at 7,000 he's not cheap, but he's certainly not the most expensive, but he's up there as far as the prices. And then I cheaped out a little bit and went with Will Fuller as a shot in the dark play.
That's not bad. We actually are very, very similar on these. I also have Odell Beckham Jr. and Doug Baldwin. And then I actually ended up going with Devontae Parker, which, the guy that we've hated and talked about so much at the beginning of this season, but I've really come around on him and really, really liked what he's done lately after he's gotten healthy and gotten all his injuries under control. So I've gotten Devontae Parker. So I've got the Matt Moore Devontae Parker stack in this one.
It's a great stack. I prefer the Eli Manning OBJ stack, but Matt Moore and Devontae Parker's right there with them, I think.
I hear that Matt Moore and Devontae Parker are the next Eli OBJ. Just what I'm hearing.
Nice. That's interesting. We'll break that news later, I think. Will Fuller is a guy I went with 4,400. You went with Devontae Parker at 4,200. Obviously, they're cheaper options. I think you could have gone middle class with your three wide receivers if you really wanted to. But I don't know that I loved the options, right? I mean, you could go like a Golden Tate, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams. They're all in the mid 5 to mid 6 range, and that's not a bad play. But then, for me, I think you kind of got to go studs and duds when you're talking about such a limited player pool.
Yep, I think you nailed it. You picked all those guys, and there's a chance that all three of them can put up a goose egg. And so, I mean, you want to get this at least one or two guys in there that you feel comfortable with having a floor. And it seems like in this week you're going to have to pay for those kind of guys. So, yeah, you went Will Fuller, 4,400, kind of a boomer bust guy, and then Devontae Parker. We've seen him put up zeros. We've seen him put up 20 points. So I think we both were kind of leaning that way. And like we said, we both have OBJ and Doug Baldwin in there. So.
Yeah, if you're
must have been thinking something the same.
If you're playing a GPP and you're looking to, for me, when you play those, obviously we're playing head to head here, so we're talking about head to head lineups. But I do still think that in a GPP you're probably going to go with a studs and duds for this particular week, but you may not. For A cash game, you may be a little bit safer and go some, less studs and more, mid-range players. You know what I mean? You might do 1 or 2 studs instead of like 4 studs and then really cheap. So where I have Kenyon Drake, I might have gone somewhere a little higher there if I'm playing a cash game, because you do want a floor. While these guys are boom or bust, like Kenyon Drake could have 10 points because he gets a score somewhere, but he could also, like you said, give it the goose egg. So in a cash game, that's not a guy I would probably take. So I may maybe I don't go with Doug Baldwin. Maybe I go a little cheaper than him and kind of spread that out or something along those lines. So, all right, tight end. I always, and maybe this is my downfall, I always save money on tight end in DraftKings or DFS. Always go cheap. I went Will Tye in this one against Green Bay, the New York Giants tight end, 2,800. I thought he was a bargain. I didn't think... I didn't love any of the top options. I think Jimmy Graham's okay in this, but 5,300 seems like a lot for a tight end. Fedorowicz seemed a little overpriced for me because it's Osweiler. We don't know for sure that he's gonna throw it to Fedorowicz. And I just didn't love any of the other options. And at 2,800, I figured if I don't love anyone, might as well go cheap.
Yep, I had the same exact mindset there. I have Will Tye, 2,800. I was also looking at Fedorowicz, but I knew as soon as I put Fedorowicz in my lineup, Ryan Griffin was gonna go off for a couple touchdowns. So I went a no-go with either of the Houston tight ends. Like you said, Jimmy Graham is the obvious option, but he's 5,300, almost double the price of Will Tye. So I think I'd rather spend elsewhere and take a guy that, he doesn't do much, but he gets some volume. He gets 4 or 5 targets a game, sometimes closer to 10, and, maybe gets into the end zone for you this week. What got me was Ladarius Green questionable this week at 4,500. I think you'd be crazy to put him in your lineup after, not playing the last couple games because of injury. And at that price tag, you can even go Fedorowicz for $300 cheaper. I thought Ladarius Green was way overvalued.
Yeah, I think the thought process there is what? Because it's concussions. If he's cleared, he's cleared, and you don't have to worry about it. But there obviously we've seen the risk of of another concussion increases when you're coming off of one. So I'm with you. I think he's overpriced. I wouldn't have done that. My question for you though is: do you think we should have saved the 300 on tight end and gone with Sal's guy, Jarrell Adams?
Now that you say that, would you allow the change? No, I'm not going Jarrell Adams. Next year.
I will allow it if you want.
No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not doing it.
Yeah. All right. So for flex, I think we're both probably going to be in the same boat, right? We both went high end. I went Antonio Brown for mine at 9,400. Who did you go with?
Yes, you were actually wrong.
Oh.
Yes, because I went Le'Veon Bell much earlier on in my lineup, and then went with Odell Beckham and Doug Baldwin. I actually had to go as low as you could. And I went with Seth Roberts. So this is my Kenyon. This is my Kenyon Drake play.
There he is. Yes, that makes sense. Yes.
Yep.
What's the cost on Seth Roberts?
$3,000.
$3,000. So he literally is your Kenyon Drake. So you could have gone either of those.
Yep. I could have. But I went with Seth Roberts. You can't pick between Amari or Michael Crabtree. Then Seth Roberts is probably due for a touchdown. They're going to be focusing on those two guys so much. Connor Cook, just going to launch one down to him. I got it.
Go. In a PPR format like DraftKings is, obviously, at least if he catches the ball once, he gets a point, whereas Kenyon Drake could run the ball 3 times and get negative yardage. So
that's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I could see your logic there. I think my pick I'm comfortable with my Antonio Brown. Look, like we said, studs and duds. I have Antonio Brown and Odell Beckham both in this lineup, and I think Doug Baldwin and Eli Manning are on that higher end as well. So to round it out. So I think, and who would you have? Who do you have? You have Le'Veon Bell, so you went really high end.
Yep, Le'Veon Bell,
Odell
Beckham. But see, you've got, and then and that's kind of where it ends for me.
Yeah. Yeah, so, you went all in on those guys, so you're hoping for a good day.
Le'Veon Bell was definitely costing me quite a bit. Yep. So if he doesn't pan out, then my entire lineup is pretty screwed. But,
and really, that'll decide this matchup, because if he doesn't pan out, it'll mostly likely be because Antonio Brown caught 3 touchdowns, which means
Yes.
I'll have won. So for defense, I went Raiders. They were 3,000. They were cheap. I think going against Osweiler, they're good for at least a pick, even though I think they lose this game. I think it's a low-scoring game. So for my mind, I was picking either Houston or Oakland all the way. And with Houston coming in at 3,800 versus Raiders at 3,000, that's why I went that way.
Yep, I went Raiders at 3,000 as well. Pretty much had the same kind of mind or thinking there, and yeah, I just didn't trust all the defenses as much, and the ones that you did trust were just they're a little bit too much, a little too expensive. Don't want to spend too much on my defense pretty much ever.
That's right. All right, so that about does it for the DraftKings portion of the show. Just a reminder, DraftKings does not sponsor this show, so
Yet.
And that's it for the show in general, Steve. We did it. Hopefully we helped some people with their lineups and with their playoff challenge lineups this episode. Hopefully they got something out of it. And if not, they at least get to hear your final thought.
That's right. If they're still listening, thank you for making it this far and listening to the Falafel House Fantasy Football Podcast. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you can do that at Falafel House. Look for us on Facebook and Instagram. We are just search for Falafel House there. Of course, go to falafelhouse.com to find all kinds of daily fantasy goodness. Maybe not so daily anymore, but you can find the sign up for the Falafel House Fantasy Playoff Challenge. Go ahead and get signed up. Take on Sal, Kev, myself, all the falafelers in the chat. Just go ahead, sign up, do it. It's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun, and I just want to remind everyone that we love iTunes reviews. Actually, like any kind of reviews, but I don't even know how to review people on other platforms, so I always say iTunes. But if you could go out there and review us on iTunes, we do know, Steve, I don't know if you've looked at the numbers, but the overwhelming majority of people do download us on iTunes. So
yes, that's true.
So I'm just going to keep saying it. Please go to your iTunes and review us. We would love to have the last review replaced, as I keep mentioning. So, but no one's done it yet. Anyway, thanks again for listening. And we will be back, I believe, next week. We are going to be back with Monday's show, but that has not been ironed out. We'll let you know. We'll tweet it out. Obviously, it'll either be Monday or Tuesday. And until then, Steve, hit the button.